When we think about a successful book release, so often we're thinking about the tactics we plan to use. Things like our social media posts, book signings, maybe even a sales funnel. But often I find that there is one crucial component that is missing from authors' plans for their book launch. And that component is psychology. Stay tuned. Today we're going to talk about the psychology behind a successful book launch.
You've got the story, you've got the idea. You just don't know the steps in the process. If this is what's holding your memoir back, I have got the solution for you. The Memoir Method Checklist is going to take you through every single step you need from idea to published marketable book. And you can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist.
If you have been following along with this channel, then you know we are on our third installment of our 4-part series on book sales. And one thing that I have really tried to do in this particular series is focus on the ways that mindset can really affect not only your experience of launching and selling a book, but also your success in that area. And that's what I want to talk about today, actually, is the way that our mindset actually can influence how well prepared we are for these really important milestones in our book progress. And now today I'm talking about releasing a new book, trying to get some sales to that book. But I do want to let you know that actually this particular setting is something that is going to apply to almost every single stage of writing a memoir. Because when we're working with a memoir, there is a very particular psychology that's always going to come into play. Okay, so let's get to it. Today, what I want to talk about is the way that our nervous system can actually make or break the way that we both experience a launch and the way that we see results from that launch. And like I said, this is something that you actually will also see in lots of other areas of your book writing process. So I think you're going to get a lot out of this video. So let's start by identifying what is the problem. What is this thing that tends to happen when our psychology, our mindset is not well aligned for this task of launching a book? And what I see happen so often is that authors have the best intention for launching a book. But what gets the best of them is the fact that when you are putting out a book, particularly a memoir or really any kind of nonfiction, it feels so kind of vulnerable and exposed. And what I see happen really often is that authors will experience their nervous system being really triggered by that exposure. And what can happen so quickly in seriously the snap of my fingers is that when our nervous system starts to be met with all of these new stimuli, so things like being in the public spotlight, things like worrying what your family or friends might say when they read your memoir, these things can really overload our nervous system so quickly and often in a way that we don't even notice. But what you will notice are the physical and mental symptoms of your nervous system being overloaded. So let me kind of give you some of those symptoms because I guarantee you have experienced this. You might not have experienced it quite yet in your book launch or book sales campaign, but this is just a very normal human reaction. It is just our body trying to protect us. So what does it look like when our nervous system gets overloaded and dysregulated? So this can be anything from mental types of symptoms. This may be that you feel like you can't quiet your mind. There are just so many thoughts and they are racing and they're kind of piling on top of each other. And you feel a little bit like you can't even find a sense of peace. It might also feel like you are very kind of touchy. So maybe, with your spouse or your friends or your family, you'll tend to really kind of go off on people just for really stuff that would not normally bother you. But again, because you're so kind of overwhelmed and overloaded, just the littlest kind of comment or, offhanded remark or joke can really land in a different way than it might normally for you. You also will likely have some kinds of physical symptoms. So symptoms that are physical of your nervous system being really kind of overstimulated and dysregulated can often be things like digestive problems. you've probably experienced this. If you've ever been really kind of nervous or just feeling kind of afraid of some kind of new unknown thing, and you'll have some kind of gurgly stuff in your tummy, that is often a symptom that our nervous system is dysregulated. But there also are lots of other symptoms, and oftentimes this is going to show up in a way that is really specific to you. So you might have things like frequent headaches. You might notice that kind of your face and your chest will kind of flush, again, at just kind of a hair trigger, just a little comment, and you'll get kind of worked up. You might notice, or kind of if you check your blood pressure, you might notice that your blood pressure is up. But in general, what you're going to experience when your nervous system gets into this state of dysregulation is you're just going to feel off. You're just not going to feel settled, and you're not going to feel grounded. So, of course, as promised, I am going to connect this kind of analysis to our topic today, which is book launching and book sales. But first, in case you're not familiar with the terminology around our nervous system regulation, I just want to give a kind of quick primer before we connect it both to sales and launching your book, but also to some of the other stages that this is going to come up for you during the book writing process, the marketing process, the publication process. Okay, so if you are not familiar with the conversation around nervous system function, there are two states that our nervous system is naturally going to move between: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, the sympathetic nervous system, I find, is the one that most people are more familiar with. So when we're talking about the sympathetic nervous system, we are talking about, often we will say fight or flight. Now, in the psychology community, we have added a couple more states for this sympathetic way that our nervous system is reacting. We can have fight, flight, freeze, meaning we just freeze. If you've ever seen a deer get hit by a car on the highway, they just freeze, right? That is the freeze response that we can also have when our body is in this sympathetic nervous system state. And we also can have a response that we call fawn. So this would be if you think of kind of fawning over someone, and I am looking at all of you and me, habitual people pleasers out there, because a fawn response is going to look like trying to make everyone around you happy. Now, the fawn response is going to be really, really important here, because what I find is that when authors are in the process of both writing and publishing and marketing their book, what very often happens is that the instinct is to go out there and people please. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But the point I want to make here is that when we think of our sympathetic nervous system, our fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response, that is being triggered for a really important reason. Our sympathetic nervous system is always going to kick in when our body feels that there is a threat. And that's really important, right? Now, oftentimes I will hear people talk about the sympathetic nervous system in terms of kind of caveman days, right? When we're being chased by a brontosaurus. That's not a real thing, by the way. I'm just joking. But when we're being chased by a brontosaurus or some scary animal, we need our body to, for example, send more blood to our extremities so that we can run faster, right? We might need, if we are not going to be able to outrun, we might need to do something like freeze into place or hide or even fight back. And this is what our sympathetic nervous system is wired to do. It is designed that when we perceive a threat coming toward us, we are well equipped to save ourselves from that threat. That's what helps us survive. Now, while I do really often hear people talk about the sympathetic nervous system in terms of that kind of early human scenario, I also want to point out that we also naturally and helpfully have a sympathetic nervous system response when we are faced with modern day stress. So that can be things like a book launch. It can be things like pressure from your editor to finish your writing. But it also can be the types of traumas that we went through that so often are at the heart of our memoir. And this is why I wanted to talk about this today, because very often this fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response is something that we have had in the past as a reaction to a very real trauma. So if you have ever been in a scenario where you really were not sure you would be okay, almost 100% of the time, your nervous system is going to kick in. And you know when else it's going to kick in? When you are later recounting the details of that story. And here is why this is such a crucial point for memoirists. Because the entire writing, production, and marketing phase, all of these steps of your book process are all going to require you to revisit past memories. And when you are especially writing about something like trauma or survival or overcoming, you are very often re-entering that sympathetic nervous system state throughout the process. And what that means is when you get to the book launch stage, you are very likely already at a low level state of your sympathetic nervous system being activated. Unless you are frequently doing things like attending therapy, please do this. Journaling, please do this. You probably need to give your nervous system a little extra boost to get back out of that sympathetic fight, flight, freeze, fawn response and into the other state, the parasympathetic nervous system state. Now, unlike this kind of fight or flight or freeze or fawn state, our parasympathetic response is often called the rest and digest stage. And what that means is when we are able to move out of our fight or flight or freeze or fawn into our rest and digest, our body is able to kind of do some of the healing and recuperation that were not your body's priority when you were trying to outrun that mountain lion, right? At that point, your body was really only invested in your literal survival. But most of us want more than survival, right? And especially if you are trying to get a book out there, I know you want more than survival. So what you need to be doing is moving yourself into the parasympathetic response, because it is in the parasympathetic response that we are able to feel open and grounded and centered. It is in that parasympathetic space that we are able to actually see and take advantage of the very real opportunities that will prop up for every single author who is putting a book out. Okay, so that takes me really neatly into the next thing I want to discuss, and that is, so how exactly is the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system related to book sales? And there are a handful of ways that I see this, but I really want to focus on two major ways that problems crop up because people are having this sympathetic nervous system response. The first of those that I will see is a sense of desperation in authors. Now, this makes sense because your sympathetic nervous system is quite literally the center for desperation. If we think of trying to escape some kind of a life-threatening stimulus, of course, that is going to feel like desperation for many of us, right? But the problem is, I see so many people get taken into scam companies because they are so dysregulated. And I want to give you a specific example with a client that I kind of worked through this with pretty recently. Now, this is a person that has published their book on their own, and it was years ago. We worked with them on this book, but they are a self-published, proudly a self-published author. They do speaking, they get around and try to kind of get their book out. But this person is also on the older side. And one thing that I started to see happening with him was that there was a really clear sense that he was needing to slow down. Now, when we had first put the book together, he really had kind of big dreams of taking kind of national stages for speaking. But you know, life is gonna life, and what has ended up happening is he needed to slow down a bit. Well, any author will tell you when you slow down your promotion, you will also slow down your sales. Now, what I would suggest is that if that is what your body is telling you, that you need to slow down, the best thing you can do is listen. It doesn't have to be permanent, and it doesn't have to mean that you cease all marketing strategies, which is what he and I had talked about. Now, my suggestion for him was that if he was feeling that the travel for actual live speaking was getting to be a little bit too much, to maybe consider thinking about running some reels or thinking about kind of a targeted social media strategy, a Facebook group or something like that. But what happened was that this author was so dysregulated that there was a real palpable sense of desperation. And what happened was that I began to then get emails from him where he was finding these different companies that were promising him the world. The most recent, the last one, the one that I reached out and said, let's chat about this, was an offer from a company that had asked him to spend $20,000, and they were going to get him on the New York Times bestseller list. Now, if you have been watching this series, you know that this is literally impossible. Self-published authors are not on the New York Times bestseller list because the New York Times bestseller list does not accept self-published authors. So I knew that this was not a real thing. And you know what else? I think that author knew too. But what happens when we are in this state of dysregulation is that we are so desperate to be told it will be okay that we're willing to listen to almost anyone. And that's what happened here. Now, I intervened in this. I told him, do not give those people $20,000. We have marketing professionals that we frequently refer people to. I'm happy to do that for you, by the way, if you're watching this, and that is what I did for him as well. But what I want to point out here is that when you are so activated, when you are dysregulated, in this state of really feeling kind of vulnerable and open and overly exposed, you are a prime target for scammers. So I'm going to talk about what to do in a second, but I don't want you to panic. What I do want to say is the reason I point this out is not because I want you to go deeper into that fear center. Absolutely not. What I want you to do instead is pull back and care for yourself, your mind and your body, because, and that brings me to the second thing, when you are regulated, you will be so much more open to seizing the opportunities in front of you. So besides this kind of feeling of desperation that I see, the second major issue that I will see crop up with authors who are in this dysregulated state is that they are not able to see the good things that are happening. Now, you can see exactly where I'm going here if you have been following along in this series, because as you know, book marketing, like all marketing, has a trial and error component. And you know what you can't do trial and error is when you're not able to see what is successful. And what can happen is if you are in this dysregulated state, you have got your sympathetic nervous system fired up in that fight, flight, fawn, or freeze, what can happen is that you are trying different strategies and none of them will look good enough to you. Because when we are feeling exposed like that, all we want is someone to reassure us, right? All we want is someone to say, it really is okay. It is completely okay. You don't need to worry about any of this. But what our sympathetic nervous system is trained to do is not to look at all the things that are going well that we can double down on and continue and build from. What our sympathetic nervous system tells us to do is watch for all the threats. Now, if you are doing trial and error marketing, if you are trying to get your foothold, you can see exactly what I'm going here. Because when we are so stuck on the fact that there are threats around us in our environment, all we're going to want to do is withdraw, right? We do not want to look for the glimmer of something working, which is necessary, by the way, for an effective marketing strategy. All we want to look for are the signs of danger. So what does that look like? That means that where we might be looking at some, maybe modest, maybe not as fast as you want it, but some growth on our newsletter list, instead, what we are focused on is that person that left a mean comment on our Facebook post. This is so easy to do. It is so understandable. And yet, it's totally unnecessary. It is a prolonged state of suffering, and I do not want that for you. Now, I promised you earlier in this video that I want to kind of talk about not only how this particular issue is going to affect you in book launching, but I also do want to talk about how it will affect you in the content of the book itself. Because while you are promoting, as you know, if you are in this world, you are still very much in the world of your book's content. So whether you are writing, editing, publishing, whatever it may be, you may also see some of these symptoms of the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic nervous system cropping up to block your progress. So I want to share one specific story because I think this is going to resonate with a lot of you. Now, this is a client that I worked with some time ago, but what I will tell you is when she came to me, her manuscript was near publishable. Now, this is not really that common. Most of the time, folks who reach out are people who either they don't have really anything on paper and they need some help getting started. Sometimes they will have kind of a full first draft of a manuscript, but they know they still have a lot of revision to do, or it can be anything in between. But it is pretty rare that in the editing part of my business, I have people come to me with a manuscript that I would really say, this is pretty well ready. And that is what I told her. This manuscript is so close. Now, she had paid us to do a manuscript review, which I think is always a great way to kind of bolster your confidence, get an outsider's opinion on kind of what's going on, what the strengths are, because that can be a really helpful step forward when you're querying, as this client was planning to do, to try to get a traditional book contract. But when I kind of wrote back and said, here is the manuscript review, my team and I really loved this work. We love what you're doing. Here are a few minor suggestions, but really this is ready to send out. When I communicated that to her, she was really unsettled by that. And in fact, she pushed back against me and she said, I really think I need some editing though. I don't think this is good enough. I think I need some more help. So we kind of went back and forth and we were kind of chatting about this. And in the end, what it came down to, as I kind of asked really, what are you looking for? What do you need? What it came down to was that she wanted someone to sit with her and just validate, just kind of encourage her and let her know that she had done a good job. Now, this is a specialty of mine. I'm always happy to tell people that they're doing a good job when they are, of course. But in this case, it really wasn't necessary. And as we started kind of digging through what was happening with her internally, one thing that became so clear was the reason that she wanted that validation was not because she hadn't heard that the book was good. In fact, I was not the first editing professional to tell her that the book was good. What was happening was that this book was a story about overcoming a trauma, but it was the type of trauma that kind of continues in your life even after it's over. What had happened was in the process of writing and editing this manuscript, she had gotten her nervous system so worked up that all she wanted was someone to just reassure her that things would be okay. Now, this is something that a writing professional could do for you. It's probably better left to the mental health professionals. But what I want to tell you is there is no reason that you need to pay thousands and thousands of dollars either to be reassured by a book marketing company or to be reassured by an editing professional. When we are going into the process grounded and calm in that parasympathetic rest and digest stage, we are going to feel so much better about what we're doing, and we will be able to self-soothe. So, okay, I want to give you a few kind of tips and tricks that you can use right now if some of this is resonating. If you are feeling like you have this kind of sense that you're not able to settle, you're not able to kind of slow yourself down, you're not able to really focus and be open. Instead, you are kind of on edge, on guard, you feel maybe gurgly in your stomach. I want to give you some tips, some things that you can do right now to get yourself feeling a little better. Okay, so I have a few of these. The first one is, I want you to move. Now, authors, I know because I am one of you, oftentimes we like to sit. We like to read, we like to sit at our computer and write, of course. But one of the most valuable things that you can do for your nervous system, not only to re-regulate after you're in that sympathetic state, but also to keep yourself from so easily getting triggered back into that sympathetic state, is to move. So the first thing I want you to do is find some kind of movement that feels good to you. Now, this does not have to be, and in fact, maybe shouldn't, really intense exercise. So if you have done things like high intensity interval training, it is terrible, let me tell you. That is where you run as fast as you can for just a small period of time. You go a little bit slower, amp it up again, go a little slower. This kind of thing actually can re-trigger your sympathetic nervous system because you are, in effect, recreating this sense of running away from the saber-toothed tiger. But instead, I want you to think about some of the types of movement that would feel really good, feel really calming for you. So for me, I live in Northwest Arkansas. There are beautiful trails here. I like to go out and explore new trails. I don't push myself to walk really quickly. I just push myself to be calm and in touch with that movement. Now, one tip that I have picked up kind of along the way is that if you really, really hate movement, one thing that you can do is lay down, sit down, close your eyes, and really vividly imagine escaping from a saber-toothed tiger. Now, I know this feels so weird to do, but if you can imagine the triumph of the escape, that will often close the loop. It will allow you to feel like you can kind of calm down and relax. Now, if you choose this alternative to actual movement, one thing I do want to let you know, you are going to have to use all of those imagination skills that you have as a writer to make this visualization really, really vivid. In fact, when I have done this successfully myself, I can even feel my muscles twitching a little bit. I can feel that my body kind of is bought into this imagery I'm creating in my mind. But physical movement, or kind of the imagination of physical movement, either of those can be good. See what feels good to you. Try some different things. Maybe you like to go on walks. Maybe you like to ride a bike. Maybe you like to do yoga. My second tip, if you are needing to move out of the sympathetic nervous system state and into the parasympathetic, is to try some type of somatic movement. Now, this is very easy to find right on YouTube. If you search for somatic yoga practice, you will come up with lots of options. When we talk about somatic movement, all we are talking about is the mind-body connection. And in fact, somatic movement is a technique that has been developed specifically to help us become aware of and calm our nervous system. So this kind of movement is typically going to be slower. It's often going to have a real focus on breathing, which is great for your nervous system, by the way. And it's going to encourage you to really think about the different sensations that you have in your body. And one really great thing about this is that as you kind of become aware of your body in this way, you'll be much more able also to kind of see these shifts coming. So you will feel yourself moving into the sympathetic, and you can much more easily able to kind of target that right at that moment, rather than needing it to get to this place of kind of desperation or needing a lot of validation. So first one, I want you to get some movement in. The second, consider whether a somatic practice might be good for you. The third way that you can help to regulate your nervous system is through a process called EFT. This is the Emotional Freedom Technique. You can also find some folks right here on YouTube who will lead you through this process. Sometimes it is called tapping, and it will literally guide you through tapping on your face, your kind of collarbone, the top of your head. But these folks will lead you through this process while you are kind of saying some kind of affirmation. So check this out. I know it might sound a little bit wacky, but it has been, in my experience, one of the ways that I can really get from sympathetic to parasympathetic, even when I have gotten really into this spiral of the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So third thing I want you to do is check out some EFT practices and see if those are going to be useful for you. The fourth option that I have is to focus on some deep breathing. Our nervous systems love to have that sense of kind of calm and relaxation. And if what you are trying to do is regulate your nervous system, one thing that you can do to signal to your body that it is okay to come into rest and digest is to very intentionally take deep breaths where the exhale is slightly longer than the inhale. So if you are breathing on a count, you might breathe in for a count of 4 and exhale for a count of 6. What you are doing is signaling to your body that you do not need to be intaking excess air, that it is okay and safe to relax and let that air out of our lungs really rest. Okay, and the fifth tip that I want to give you, this is less of kind of a quick fix and more of something that you can do along the way. And that is that I want you to start to dial into how your body feels all the time. It will make you more effective at literally every single activity that you do. So what do I mean by this? I mean, number one, get enough sleep. Get off your phone, put your phone in the other room if you possibly can, and make sure that you are getting plenty of good quality sleep. I mean, eat. And I don't even just mean eat nutritiously, but one thing that I have seen a lot in myself and people that I have worked with is if we delay eating after our body is hungry, well, that of course does not send a safety signal to our body, right? In fact, it signals that we might be in some kind of physical danger. So when you get hungry, have a snack. This is going to require you to be really in touch with your body and how you're feeling. But again, that is going to be a game changer for getting the results you want in literally any part of your life, but particularly in your book launch when all this stress is going to crop up. I also want you to incorporate some of this physical activity into your life when you are in any kind of a stressful situation. Often the first thing we want to do is cut out things we think of as extra. Very often this means exercising, but exercising is not extra. It is absolutely required for our health, so get some exercise. And then the last kind of weird, wacky tip that I want you to do to care for your nervous system is make sure that you are listening to your body's cues. When you need to go pee, go pee. I know you were not expecting that in a video about a book launch, but truly, the more that we can dial into what our body needs and give our body those things, the more able we are to very easily recognize that we are moving into a space that we really do not need to be in, that we are not in danger. We can let our body know, you know what? It is okay. I'm going to give you what you need because it is available to me. Okay, so I hope that this has been helpful as you are moving through all of the stages of your book from that initial idea to that launch process. One thing I want you to really keep in mind is that there is not going to be any amount of validation that is going to make you feel better if you are not caring for your nervous system. This is just an unfortunate truth. When we are in that sympathetic state, we are not looking for the good things. We are looking for the bad things. And as long as you're trying to launch a book, sell a book, build your audience from that sympathetic state, you will not only be miserable, but you will also continually struggle to get the results and the success that I know you want. Okay, as we are moving forward, we have one more video in this series on book launches. So I want you to like, rate, review, subscribe on whatever platform you happen to be on, because next week you are not going to want to miss our video on how to promote your book even when you don't feel like an expert. This is a question that I have gotten on a lot of YouTube videos. I've gotten in a lot of emails. People say, you know, I wrote this memoir, but I'm not an expert. How do I step forward and promote it? Well, tune in because next week I'm going to tackle exactly that topic. In the meantime, if you are in the middle of a launch, I hope it is going just the way that you had hoped. Incorporate some of these tips so that you can feel even better about the success that you're having. If you are at any other stage of the book writing process and it would be helpful to get some real targeted support, I hope that you will reach out. My team and I would love to take you from anywhere from the idea to a draft all the way through to that launch. So please reach out. And in the meantime, happy writing.
You know what they say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And this is exactly what holds so many people back on their memoir projects. That is exactly why we created the Memoir Method Checklist, a full, complete list of every single step you need to take to get that memoir written, published, and marketed successfully. You can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist.